So now we are in the 20th chapter. We have come all the way up to the 20th chapter of 1 Samuel in our study. Before we move on, we'll take a quick look back at chapter 19, which is what we did last time, right? So in the last chapter, we saw how Jonathan had to confront his father after he orders David to be killed. Until 19, we had seen how Saul was secretly trying to get rid of David because he was jealous of him and he threatened his sense of security. And in 19, we saw how Saul was now asking Jonathan and Michael's loyalty to further his plans of getting rid of David so that he could secure his position, right? And in the face of this, we saw how Jonathan uh, he makes a persuasive case to defend David with his father, right? He confronts his father and he argues very persuasively, so persuasively that Saul actually promises, he takes an oath, as surely as the Lord lives, that is Saul, would not put David to death, right? And but we saw that Saul, this promise was not very long lasting for Saul. Today, we have reason to believe that on the face of his relationship with Jonathan, he tried to preserve the vision, the illusion that he was keeping this promise, but secretly he went back to ways to try to kill David, right? We were told how in his heart raged a war of insecurities and pride. That's what we looked at last time, because we saw that portion where there's a war that breaks out with the Philistines, but we saw a similar war was raging within Saul's heart. So he could not keep his promise because his heart was very, very open to all of these conflicting emotions, right? We also saw how Michal, Saul's daughter, helps David escape, but she did it for her personal reasons. We saw she very closely modeled, in a way, not closely, she modeled how Rahab helped the spies escape from Jericho, but both of them had very different motivations to do that. And then we also saw towards the end how Saul, when David flees to Samuel's camp at Ramah, at Naioth in Ramah, how Saul tries to send emissaries. He sends 3 sets of servants to capture David. But how God now intervenes supernaturally. The first 2 times he intervenes through Jonathan and Michal. This time he intervenes directly supernaturally, and he turns the curses, the threat that the servants posed, into a blessing, right? How the servants end up prophesying. And we kind of guessed that these prophecies in some way would have been lifting up David and God's for David, right? And Saul, finally frustrated, decides to do the job himself. But it ends up in Saul's humiliation. Saul also is brought low. He is also brought low, so much so that he prophesies and he disrobes himself. He divests himself of all his royal garments, and he lays down humiliated before Samuel, right? While he prophesies. And there was this question that was asked at the end of last chapter: is Saul also among the prophets? We recalled how we saw the same question being asked in an earlier chapter, right? And that was when Saul was anointed as king. After he was anointed as king, anointing as king was indeed, it was an affirmative sign that God was empowering him as king. But here we see the prophecy, Saul prophesying. This is the second time we see him prophesying. And this time it is a sign of his humiliation, and that the fact that he has now been divested of his suitability as a king, right? So the same question once earlier was a proverb that pointed to Saul's divine selection and empowerment as a king of Israel, though he was just a layman at that point. The same question now was asked as a questioning Saul's suitability as a king, right? So that's where we left it last time. Today, we will continue the same thread that Saul is trying to squash out David as a threat, right? So the same plot line continues, and we have the same 3 characters: Saul, Jonathan, and David in today's chapter also. To understand today's portion, we need to remember what we heard in chapter 18, right? In 18, we were told how when Jonathan heard David's testimony to Saul about how he overcame the challenge of the Philistines and Goliath, his heart was united. spiritually, God entwined their souls together. A bond was created spiritually between Jonathan and David. And that's what we were told in 18, right? And in this chapter, we will see how that seed, that bond that was spiritually created, the seed of that spiritual bond, matures and bears fruit in today's chapter. So look at the relationship of David and Jonathan, how they are challenged, right? Several questions that challenge him. David tells Jonathan that your father is trying to kill me still. And Jonathan has all these questions. Has my father broken the oath he took to David in the last chapter? Is he still trying to eliminate him? If that is true, what should be my response? All of these challenges are things that we will look at. And while looking at these challenges, we will see how a relationship, what is a true relationship and what makes a true loving relationship. On what grounds do loving relationships stand and flourish, or weak relationships flounder and. So this is what we will explore in today's lesson. Okay. So the first portion is from chapter 1 to 23. What are we going to see in this portion? We are going to see how David flees to Jonathan now, right? He's coming back to the place where Jonathan is, which is probably Saul's stronghold. Why does he come there? Because he believes Jonathan and he wants Jonathan. He wants to renew his bond with Jonathan. He wants Jonathan's support. He knows that his life is in danger, but he's fleeing to a person to whom he feels a spiritual bond, right? And we see how Jonathan, we said, right, he is still probably under the influence of the oath that Saul took last time. He's now caught between a rock and a hard place. Does he believe David or does he believe Saul, his father, who took an oath in the name of the Lord last time, right? What is the course of action that he has to take? And will that course of action threaten his own standing with his father, right? So we see an extended transaction in the first 23 verses between Jonathan and David. And in this transaction, there are so many interesting things to observe. We will see how a relationship is challenged, how relationships are challenged, how they're stretched. And even in the face of challenges, how a relationship can retain its shape and integrity. So we will explore in this portion, what are the attributes of a relationship that give it its strength? What makes a relationship strong? So we'll first read, we could read all the way 1 to 23 before we think on this, the question that's before us, okay? Okay, so it's a long portion. So some of the things in this portion is, David has put up a kind of a test, right? To understand that meal that David is supposed to be present at. So this is a king's table, and it's normal for the leaders, the nobility, as well as for the commander of the army to dine with the king at this feast. So that's why it's used as a test. David's absence there without permission would be noticed. And David feels that there is no way Saul can be normal, right? When he confronts David, when David's in his presence. So he knows that this meal where he's absent is going to create context and a situation for Saul to reveal his real agenda to Jonathan. That's why he chooses his meal as the way to test that, right? For Jonathan to test it. So the question we are looking at is, we lift ourselves slightly above this portion, the literal context, and try to look at every statement that they make to each other. What is the transaction that is happening? With the eye of searching for, we are seeing a strong relationship between these two. Let's look at these transactions and try to understand what is the attributes, what are the different things that are happening in each verse or collection of verses that point to the reason why their relationship is so strong. Okay, that's a question for us to deliberate on. Okay, so let's look at this in a little more depth. A lot of what I want to share has already come out in the chat. So first, just a reminder, the relationship with between Jonathan and David was very special. It was bound by spiritual cords, right? We saw that in 1 Samuel 18, 1 to 3. So let's look at some things, some aspects of this relationship, why this is such a strong relationship. First observation is, a healthy relationship allows questions and sharing of concerns. The very first verse, Jonathan is actually coming, David is confronted with a statement from David. What have I done? What is my offense? How have I sinned before your father that he's seeking my life? Right? So a series of questions that he's asking, that is to share his concern. And so if you look at these questions, David clearly state what troubles him. Jonathan's father is seeking my life. Your father is seeking my life. But even in that, he's not just making an accusation. We see that he's humbly seeking to find out what's the root cause for the threat he faces. Could he be at fault? So he's asking Jonathan, who knows him very well, right? He trusts Jonathan's perspective and he's asking him, what have I done? What is my offense? Is it a rhetorical question? Probably not. If you know David, there is a humility in him, right? So he is asking Jonathan, is there a root cause that I am not seeing? So he's seeking a 360-degree perspective, right? And what is David's question not? He's not throwing at Jonathan an accusation against his father, right? It's not just a straight accusation. So he's stating a fact and he's seeking for inputs on what could be the concern here, right? So we see this relationship is allowing, there is space in the relationship for questions and for sharing of concerns. The trust that they have allows this. Second observation, a healthy relationship affirms and empathizes with each other's concerns. Jonathan starts his reply in verse 2 with, my no means are you going to die? And he goes on and it ends with, it just won't happen. So Jonathan is starting with a message of affirmation. His friend has come to him with this big question, right? And he first seeks to affirm him. He doesn't write off the question. What does Jonathan not do? He does not belittle David's concern or scoff at him. He does not miss David out of hand, right? He does not dismiss his fears, questions, concerns as though they were just unlikely to him at first glance. Do we do that quite often in our relationships? Like someone comes with a concern and you just, whether it's a spouse or a child, don't dismiss it out of hand, right? So next is we see Jonathan recognizing David's anxiety and then he starts with affirming his relationship for David first, right? So his answer seems to say, David, you have trusted and loved me enough to flee to me for help. As far as I can help it, your life will be protected. So the first is he's affirming the fact that David trusts him. He says, so your relationship with me, this trust that you have put in me is something that I recognize, that I thank you for that, right? And I am going to retain and do what I can to retain that trust. I will not let your trust down. Then Jonathan is not feeling stifled. This relationship, though it's hitting hard against Jonathan's own heart and home, Jonathan feels stifled, right? There is space in this relationship for him to feel free to express his own doubts. Like he's asking, can my father break the oath he made to me that he would preserve David's life? So he feels free to state this doubt. This relationship allows that. There is enough space between the two of them to allow Jonathan to not just cover up all his emotions, right? Then Jonathan examines and confronts a situation, starting with what he can bring to the situation, right? So he says, okay, you're saying this. Perhaps it's true. My father trusts and shares his concerns with me. Surely I will check this out with my father. So we see that this relationship is so healthy that they affirm each other and they can affirm. There is space to affirm each other and empathize with each other's concerns. What's the next observation? Healthy relationships give space for reasoning and debate, right? So David actually comes back to Jonathan and says, your father is very much aware of the fact that I have found favor with you. And he has thought, don't let Jonathan know about this or he will be upset. But as surely as the Lord and you live, there is just one step between me and death, right? So we see Jonathan and David are grappling with a very tough situation, right? And yet each is trying to see the situation from the other's eye. So Jonathan has just told him that I will check with my father. He trusts me. He shares everything with me. And David is empathizing with the position Jonathan is in. He says, perhaps Jonathan, your father is aware that you trust and love me, that we have this covenant relationship. between us, that you have sown your loyalty to me. And perhaps he does not want to upset you. So he's giving room for Jonathan there. And he's saying, the reason why your father has hidden this from you, what he really wants to achieve, is because he does not want to upset you. He does not want to let you know, right? So he's trying to see the situation from Jonathan's eyes. What do they not do? So it shouldn't be fake, right? So what do they not do? They do not write off each other's viewpoint because it just conflicts with their own. So we see both of them trying to see from each other's viewpoint. And they are together, they are in this problem, and they're trying to see it from each other's eyes. And they're just not trying to write off each other's perspective, which is something we often do in our relationships, right? We have our backs to each other, our faces to each other, right? Jonathan understands, David understands Jonathan's difficulty in understanding the situation. He says, in effect, that your father has not been transparent with you, probably because he doesn't want to upset you. And this is but natural. A father will always want to continue to look in his son's eyes as a good model. So there is this transaction that's going between them. There is reasoning, there is debate, but it's also healthy. Both feel free to share each other's perspective, and both are trying to step into the other's shoes and see it from their point and assure each other, right? Next observation. In a healthy relationship, you move forward to finding together to find a solution. So we see Jonathan says, tell me what I can do for you, right? That's how that last portion starts, 4 to 23. So the base on which they are working together on a solution for relationship, the base on which you can start working together on a solution is affirmation of each other and listening to each other's viewpoints and perspectives. And some hallmarks of a good solution, we see that in this larger part of this portion, they're working on a solution. How will they really find out if Saul wants to kill David? And if that is true, what do they do from there on, right? So they're sharing the responsibility. Both David and Jonathan have a role to play. David has to stay away from the meal. David has to hide in the field behind a rock, trusting that Jonathan will actually check with his father and that Jonathan will give him a clue as to what will happen. So there is this element which we'll look at later. Did David lie? Was he actually telling a lie to find out whether this was the truth? We'll explore those aspects when we study the latter chapters, 21, 22x. Okay, so we'll park that for now. What we look at is they are sharing the responsibility in a solution. Second is we see how they trust each other. The solution requires for them to be apart. They cannot see each other. So there has to be trust in each other, even when they are apart. Regardless of what happens as they work together on the solution, they have this trust that each will pull as best as he can for the other, right? So that is another very important hallmark of their relationship. Then there is an affirmation in this portion of their continued love for each other, regardless of the outcome, right? Even if the result is not the most pleasant, that is, even if Jonathan finds out that Saul indeed wants to kill David, they will share the consequence of that finding, right? And together they will have a shared vision of the future. So we will study that portion again, the shared vision that they have for the future. So this is the other hallmark that we see. In this relationship, they are working together towards finding a solution. As unpleasant as it may be, the facts may really turn out to be, they will still continue to have a shared vision for the future. So that's the other observation that we can make. So let's ask ourselves this question. What is it that makes this relationship between them so strong, right? We already had a clue when we started off, right? We said that we knew that this relationship bound by spiritual cords. So what is it that they share? Because of the spiritual, the same faith that they have in the Lord to unite them, what is it that that they share, right? One is in verse 12, we see that both of them call on the Lord God of Israel as their witness. So they know that it's in the Lord's eyes that all of this is happening. That it's the Lord that's going to see everything that happens. Whatever each of them does, the Lord will be their witness. Then they repeatedly swear oaths and affirmations of the covenant that they have made together in the Lord's name. So they're actually pledging themselves in the name of the Lord, right? So that's the other thing. So in every case, and then the last one is, may the Lord be with you as he was with my father. This is what Jonathan tells David, right? So he says, in effect, what he's saying is, it is the Lord who will determine the outcome. It is the Lord who anointed my father as the king. And so be it if the Lord decides that my father is at fault. So it is the Lord who is going to be with you. So if my father is indeed turning against you, I know that the Lord has already anointed you to be the future king of Israel. So the same Lord who anointed my father has anointed you, and I will stand by you. So in all of these cases, we see that the basis for the strength of the relationship is the Lord God. The fact they recognize the Lord as their witness, the fact that they recognize it's in the Lord's name that they will act, the fact that it's the Lord that will guide the course of events as he guided the course of events in the past. Okay. So the triangle, right? When you look at a triangle, it is said that the triangle is the perfect structural shape. And this is something that all architects, civil engineers recognize, right? Because a triangle, the way it is set up, it can withstand forces on all sides. They're leaning on each other and on a foundation, right? So even if you look at these very unlikely shapes where a triangle can be used, the first picture and the second are circular domes. But if you look at closely, what is holding up the circular dome in each of this case are a series of triangles, right? So I was just seeing this relationship with Jonathan and David. It could be a spousal relationship also. It's a triangle that is held together by the third side of the triangle is God, right? Between the three of them, between the two of them, it's God that is holding this triangular relationship together. So these three aspects, you, your partner, be it your friend, be it your spouse, be it your relationship with your child, the strength of that triangular relationship is the fact that it's God that's holding it together, right? So when you both work closely with God, you will be able to automatically bring each other closer to one another, right? So the relationship between Jonathan and David were bound by spiritual cords. It was a triangular relationship with God as one part of that triangle, right? Holding this, the third entity, the strong entity in this third entity in this triangle was God. And that is why the relationship had room for questions, sharing of concerns. It had room for reasoning and debate. It had room and strength to retain trust. It had room to withstand the force of uncomfortable facts. It had room for them to continue to search together for a solution. So that's what we can see in this relationship that holds Jonathan and David together. Okay. So with that, let's move to the second portion, verses 24 to 34. To a meal with his father, and he rises in rage. Right? What happens between them? So with Saul, whom he shares a blood and a genetic relationship, he sits down. And the fact of this relationship does not cloud his ability to see what is really happening, right? So let's look at that. Jonathan is realizing that for Saul, the possibility of a loving coexistence with David does not exist any longer, even if that separates him from his son, right? So like I said, we start with Jonathan sitting down to a meal with his father, and we end up with Jonathan getting up from the table enraged. What happens in between? Examine what transpires at the table between father and son that causes Jonathan to rise up in anger, right? So just a note, the Jonathan-David relationship and the Saul-Jonathan relationship are both bound together with what should have been very strong bonds. Yet one stands and the other fails, right? This filial, this genetic and this family blood relationship with Jonathan and Saul is not as strong as the spiritual relationship between David and Jonathan, right? So keep that in your mind while you look at this question, while you explore and see what happens at the table that causes Jonathan to rise up in anger. That's our second question. I think we'll just proceed, right? Because we have already, I'm assuming all of you have read it. Yeah. Suma said, Jonathan was angry as his father was not keeping his promise of not hurting David. He did not want Saul to sin against the Lord. Jonathan truly believed that David was a chosen king. He had a passion for fulfilling God's promises. He was unhappy that Saul was trying to kill David in spite of no fault of David. Nancy says, isn't Jonathan breaking the law? Respect your father and mother. Yeah, good question, Nancy. I think we looked at that even last time, right? that so we will touch on that again this time also. Last time also we looked at that command, honor your father and mother, and we saw how that needs to be, how that command had to be supported with parents modeling in when you in your rising up and your in every hour of the day, in every action, in your going out and you're coming in your rising up and you're going down to bed, every time and always in all that you do, a parent had the responsibility to model the laws of the Lord, right? So those two commands go together. When Moses was teaching in Deuteronomy the commands and the laws of the Lord, he emphasized that part of it, right? So let's just get into this portion a little more.
So just one point I noticed is, I think, see, Jonathan does not get cowed down by what Saul has actually said and insulted him. Rather, he basically questions Saul by asking, why should he be killed? What has he done? Okay, which clearly says that, Jonathan is a man by his word, and relationships between a father and son are one aspect, but then reasoning is a stronger aspect which Jonathan is trying to pursue with his father.
Yeah, very true. Actually, we have seen this earlier, this part of Jonathan's character, right? How his spiritual inclination and his faith in God and his knowledge of God's passion, his passion for God's mission in his life trumped everything else. He sought the glory of the Lord above everything else, right? So we see in this portion how Saul's pretenses do not stand the test, right? He's easily exposed. And he employs a lot of force to shake the relationship between Jonathan and David. So what are the forces Saul is actually employing to kind of shake Jonathan's relationship with David, right? So when he challenges Jonathan, right, he's first, there is a misplaced expectation based on parental authority. Saul is expecting loyalty to himself over and above everything else. He forgets that authority, parental or spousal, are both relationships that God creates, right? A parent and a spouse, a marriage relationship, both relationships that God has created. The authority in those relationships is sanctioned by the stewardship responsibility entrusted by the Lord. So authority does not come alone. It comes along with the stewarding responsibility that you are entrusted with. And Saul does not seem to understand this, right? We see that Saul had a suspicion and lack of trust. The first person he questions, when you read that portion, when he does not find David at the table, even on the third day, the first person he questions is Jonathan. We see that though it's his son, he knows that Jonathan has a relationship, and he points his finger immediately at Jonathan. He questions him, right? So examine this verse 30 and 32 to 32. Saul became angry with Jonathan and said to him, "You stupid traitor, didn't I realize that to your own don't I realize that to your own disgrace and to the disgrace of your mother's nakedness, you have chosen the son of Jesse, that is me? For as long as the son of Jesse is alive on the earth, you and your kingdom will not be established." So what are we seeing in this portion, right? One is the scorn and insult. So he's using scorn and insult as a weapon to challenge loyalty and to challenge Jonathan's loyalty. He's also insulting Jonathan's intelligence. He's calling him a stupid traitor, right? He's challenging both the intelligence and his loyalty. He's demeaning relationships, right? He's calling him a disgrace to his mother's nakedness. So he's actually demeaning his own wife's role, and he's demeaning the 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 fact that Jonathan is his own son here. He's disowning his son, right? And he's saying that you have chosen the son of Jesse. He's not even referring to David by name. This is a common way to show your scorn and contempt for somebody, right? He's even disowning his own son because he has chosen a relationship with David, right? Then he's using scare tactics. He's trying to scare Jonathan with the possible consequences of Jonathan's choice, right? He's saying, as long as the son of Jesse is alive, you and your kingdom will not be established. And it's very true what I think Blessy or Santosh said, that he's revealing his hand here. He's really not showing a true concern for Jonathan, but he's revealing his concern for himself and his own kingship, right? And then in that same statement, he's also seeing that he's trying to entice Jonathan with greed. He's trying to scare him as well as entice him with greed here, right? And we know behind the curtains the strong relationship, why the relationship between Jonathan and David is strong and why it will withstand all attacks. So what are the benefits of the spiritual bond between Jonathan and David? Jonathan's thinking in the face of all these attacks on their relationship, his thinking remains clear. He does not get distracted by the scorn, threats, and temptation. How does Jonathan respond to his father? He says, why should he be put to death? What has he done? Right? And if you notice, this is after all the challenges that David throws at him, right? So, and then second is, even in the face of all the scorn and all the threats and all the bluster that Saul has, Jonathan can still be clear-headed to evaluate the evidence, right? So we see that Saul threw his spear at Jonathan in order to strike him down. So Jonathan was convinced that his father had decided to kill David. So it is strange. He's not actually having a concern for his own life, the immediate threat of the spear to his own life. He sees that attempt to kill him as clear evidence. So he doesn't get mixed, the signals mixed. His thinking is clear, and he sees that in this threat against his own life, he now knows that his father has decided to kill David, right? And then Jonathan has a right perspective on the situation. He gets up from the table enraged, not at his father, right? Not that his father tried to kill him or insulted him, but he's upset that his father had humiliated David. So why should he be so concerned about that? Because he recognizes that David is the anointed one. The Lord has revealed that to him and bound him with David with spiritual cords. So we see that the strong spiritual relationship with God, with the Lord as part of the relationship, allows Jonathan to think clearly, allows Jonathan to evaluate the evidence clearly, and allows him to have a right perspective on the situation. Okay? So we'll move to the last portion, 32-42. So in this portion, we see how the faithful and resolute Jonathan makes some very tough choices that may not make sense at the worldly level. We know all the worldly enticements that Saul offered him, as well as the worldly threats. Yet he makes some tough choices. It is not surprising because we already know a lot about Jonathan and the passion that he has for God. So in this portion, both David and Jonathan know exactly the grounds that David stands from now on. David is a man who has to flee for his life from the king. Anyone who allies with David against the king automatically is going to become an enemy of the state. Yet we see in this portion that Jonathan has a shared vision and a shared hope for David, right? So let's read this portion, 35-42. Before looking at the question, what is the hope that unites the souls of David and Jonathan together? Verses 35-42. Yeah. So this portion is so deeply emotional when you look at it, right? It is so breaking. It breaks Jonathan up, what he has discovered and what is going to happen. So, and we see how passionate he is, his concern for David, even in the face of the brokenness that he faces in the relationship with his father, right? So what is it, even in the face of so much brokenness, what is the hope that unites the soul of David and Jonathan? That's a question to explore, the last question for us. Let's look back in the earlier verses. We see that while they were negotiating and planning, right, Jonathan had acknowledged that it was the Lord's plan for David to be king. He has done that earlier in chapter 10. He acknowledges it, in chapter 18. He acknowledges it again here, right? When he said that, may the Lord be with you as he was with my father. He's actually referring to the fact that his father is king because the Lord anointed him. The Lord picked him as king. And it's the same Lord who will be with you and who has chosen you and made you the anointed one, right? So Jonathan also recognizes that the Lord will sustain David even in the face of all his enemies and threat. In verse 15, we read that, don't ever cut off your loyalty to my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth and called David's enemies to account. It's an affirmation that Jonathan is making that you will be sustained by the Lord. Right? The Lord will cut off every one of your enemies from the face of the earth. At that time, he's Jonathan, remember me. Be, and he's asking that their bonds stay strong. Okay. So even in the face of all of Jonathan's affirmations, so David will surely remember how Jonathan has affirmed the fact that David is going to be king. David still we see as a humble man, right? So even though he recognizes, though Jonathan is the prince and he is serving Saul, and Jonathan the prince has affirmed that David is going to be the next king, and he's acting according to that. David is humble. He recognizes the loving personal sacrifices that his beloved friend has to make. Verse 41, when the servant had left, David got up from them, knelt with his face to the ground, bowed down 3 times, and then they kissed each other. They both wept, especially David, right? So we see that brokenness and that humility, right? So they have this uncertain, what might seem as an uncertain future, but their faith is holding them together, right? How do Jonathan and David part? Even as David is forced to flee. Verse 42, Jonathan tells David, go in peace, for the 2 of us have sworn together in the name of the Lord. The Lord will be between me and you, between my descendant and your descendants forever. So in this blessing, what can we see? One is the faith they have in each other, that they will stay true to their shared promises. So even though they're going to part ways, Jonathan is affirming the faith that they have in each other, right? That they will share, that they will stay true to their promises. And then the faith that their promises will endure through generations, right? There is an affirmation here, both from Jonathan and David, that they will pass on their faith to their children. Because he says, the Lord will be between you and me and between my descendants, your descendants forever. That's exactly what the Lord wanted parents to do, to pass on their faith to their children, right? And to pass on their affirmations, their promises, their commitments. In closing, let us recall the basis for the spiritual bond shared by David and Jonathan. What brought them together and what keeps them together? Remember, it was the shared passion for the Lord's purpose for their lives and the primacy of God's glory through their lives above all else. It is only this, the fact that it is God's purpose and the concern for the Lord's glory that actually holds them in the face of all these relationships that that the world will tell you to put above everything else. Okay. So with that, let's close with this last question that we have for our breakout session. We have looked at relationships and what is a true relationship, right? We see how some relationships stand while others fail. And the life-sacrificing relationship between Jonathan and David is built on a type of love that is captured by the Hebrew word hesed. In the Old Testament, this word hesed is used several times, over 250 times, to kind of give you a description of the kind of love God has, right? Hesed love is a love that is long-suffering, forgiving, action-inspiring, compassionate, loyalty-building, and much more, right? Throughout the Old Testament, it is used. And it is that same, so through all of this, we see an expression of God's essential character. And that is the reason. It is because we recognize God's essential character through this Hesed love that we know we have a gospel, that this gospel is something in which we can hope and that we can preach to others, that we can share with others, right? So the question is, we all exist within relationships. What has sustained the strong relationships in your life and weakened others? I'm sure all of us have had broken relationships as well as strong ones. What is it that has sustained the strong ones and weakened the ones that have failed or that tend to fail? And what could you do different to repair broken and strained relationships? That's our question for the breakout session.